Okay, so let's just spend a few minutes meditating, just focusing the mind in a similar way to how I've done the last 2 weeks. And if you already have a method that you use to focus the mind using the breath, then to go ahead and to do that, just apply effort into focusing the mind. Otherwise, one method that can be used is to be aware of the sensation of the air coming in through the nostrils and passing back out. And as best as possible, just to rest your awareness on the experience of the sensation of the air coming in and going out. And of course, as we know, if we've sat and meditated with our mind, know only too well that the mind tends to become distracted, often drawn to memories in the past and for plans into the future. And then also there are other distractions like sounds inside the room, wherever you are now, or outside, sensations in the body, so on. And so our business here, just for this brief period of time, is to try to put effort into bringing the mind back to the breath, while at the same time being alert to the distractions that arise, and just to note those without buying into the story. So you're aware of their arisal, but you don't allow them to sweep you away like a tsunami, like that, nor do you try to suppress it. You just to note whatever arising, can even say, memory, plan, thought, sound, whatever. And just to gently, but with diligence, to bring the mind back to the breath. All right, so just to continue like that for the next few minutes. Okay, so then now can recite the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. Sangye choram sogi chonam la joncho vadu dani kapsuchi dagi jin sogi pe sonam ki dola panche sangye du pasho. Sangye choram sogi chonam la joncho vadu dani kapsuchi dagi jin sogi pe sonam ki dola panche sangye du pasho. Sangye chodan sogi chonam la jancho badu dani kapsuchi dagi jin sogi pe sonam ki dola panche sangye du pasho. So then the meaning of that is I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly by the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving or listening to teachers, may attain the state of Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So then, with that recitation of the prayer, the refuge establishes the session. If we are indeed cultivating the mind of refuge, it establishes it as a Buddhist practice. And if we cultivate the aspiration to attain enlightenment in order to remove all beings from suffering, the mind of bodhicitta, then we're establishing it as a Mahayana Buddhist practice. So then, the theme of these Sundays is around the subject of becoming your own therapist. So I thought today to focus on how it is that very much how how life unfolds in a positive and negative way has a lot to do with our view on things, on our approach. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says in his teachings, in his public teachings, that it's very important to see things from many points of view, not just from your own point of view, but other points of view like this. And in the Book of Joy, which is a series of discussions between the Dalai Lama and the recently deceased Anglican Archbishop of South Africa, Desmond Tutu, there's discussion there around about, and they particularly mentioned Douglas Abrams, who brought the Dalai Lama and His Holiness together for that discussion, that there has been discussion also in the West, particularly, that one of the important factors in people's lives unfolding in a positive way is the ability to reconceptualize misfortune in a more positive way. So in other words, the ability to have the flexibility of mind that when misfortune occurs, which it will in our life, to have that kind of ability to reconceptualize that misfortune into something more beneficial. A very important factor in people having fulfilling and meaningful lives. So there were three things I thought to go through. What's happened? I've lost everyone. Oh, you've gone to the side now. It's okay, I see. Okay. I see my face is there now. Okay. So there were three examples I thought to give about this and how we can see how it is important about how we look upon things, determinant about how our mind views the world. The first was in relation to the story of Prince Siddhartha, the being who was to become Buddha Shakyamuni, and how it was the case that a week after he was born, his mother died. And he was raised by his mother's sister, who was also his stepmother, because the young prince's father had married two sisters. So his aunt raised him like her own child. The best way to honor her sister was to raise her sister's child with this attitude of loving kindness and care and protection. This would be the best way to honor her. And at a certain point in the young prince's life, I don't know how old he was, probably a young teenager, his cousin Devadatta one day fired an arrow at a swan that was flying overhead. And the arrow struck the swan, seriously wounding the swan, and the swan fell into the young prince's lap, like that, fell into the lap, like this. Devadatta came up to the Buddha, or up to the prince, and said, "It's mine, give it to me." And the prince said, "No, it's not, it's mine." Anyway, they then went with the swan to the king's minister to give a decision on whose swan it was. Was it the prince's or was it his cousin's? And the ministers decided in support of the prince to give the swan to the prince. But in the meaning of whose swan it was, from Devadatta's point of view, it seems the swan is mine. It means that I can do what I want with it. That means it may have meant to kill it, it may have meant to eat it, to use it, or whatever, like this. But when the prince said it's mine, it was more from a point of view that this was a sentient being that had fallen into his lap. And that meant it was his responsibility, mine meaning it is mine to look after. Sentient beings are mine to look after. And so it meant his responsibility was therefore to care for the swan, to look after, heal it, and then to release it. So a totally different point of view. And in so doing, then he's honoring his mother. His mother, remember, died giving birth to him. In a sense, he caused the death of his mother. But how he's living his life now is in protecting the lives of others. So that kind of outcome is a big different outcome compared to, if you look at the story, another story completely different. It was a Charles Dickens story of A Christmas Carol. So people may not know that story, they may know it, but they'd certainly know the principal character of the story, and that is Scrooge. So you might only know Scrooge from being Donald Duck's uncle, Uncle Scrooge. But everyone knows, and I think if you look in the dictionary, you'll see in the English dictionary the word Scrooge will appear, and it will mean someone who's miserly and mean. Right? I think we would understand that. But that term, Scrooge, into the English language came from that story, A Christmas Carol. And the principal character in it is Ebenezer Scrooge. And so the story goes that on Christmas Eve, Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by his deceased ex-partner, a ghost of his deceased ex-partner, a ghost. And he warns Scrooge that the chains that he now wears in this apparition are the chains that he linked together throughout his life, his chains of mean-spiritedness he did. And he's warning Scrooge, if you don't change your ways, you will end up as I am, in this eternal state of suffering. And he tells Scrooge that in the following period of time, in that night, Christmas Eve, he'll be visited by three ghosts. A ghost of Christmas past, a ghost of Christmas present, and a ghost of Christmas future, all with advice. And so when Ghost of Christmas Past manifests in the night, wakes up Scrooge, he takes him to Scrooge's early adulthood. And there we learn that actually, not long after Scrooge was born, this is according to the 1951 version of the movie. I've never read the book. I've only seen the movie. It's a very good movie, 1951, with Alistair Sim playing the title role of Ebenezer Scrooge. That Scrooge's mother died giving birth to him. And his father never forgave his son for the death of his wife, Scrooge's mother. So Scrooge had kind of lived with that. still, he was a reasonable sort of guy, very close to his sister. And then Joseph Christmas Past takes us to the actual death time of his sister. And Scrooge, of course, knew that his sister had died and also knew that she died giving birth to a son. But what he didn't know was that what her final request was, and it showed this, it was revealed to him. She said, tell my brother Ebenezer to take care of my boy. So Scrooge had not known this. And so ever since the death of his sister, he blamed his nephew, and he'd turned hard against the world. As he said, following that, the world is a hard place. And he became more and more miserable, more and more mean-spirited, more and more miserly as a result of the experience of the death of his sister. So in a sense, the story tells us that it was due to his perspective about the death of his sister following giving birth to a child, and his interpretation of that event, that the world is a hard place. So he became very unforgiving towards his nephew and anyone else who owed him a debt, any money, anything. No generosity of spirit arising out of that event. But the revelation to him of the dying request of his dearly beloved sister brought about the start of his inner transformation and his redemption into a person, a transformed being who was the embodiment of kindness and generosity. So you're going to see how it's possible that it's just due to a perspective on things that you go one way or the other. And so for most of us, there may be some people here even now whose mother died giving birth to us. I don't know. But all of us have been in a situation where our mother could have died giving birth to us. And most likely she didn't, but she could have. She was willing to give us life to bring us into this world. And in other ways, she may have died along the way, died with disappointment, with the various things that we've done with our life, things that we've done to let her down. So she's gone through many, many deaths, in a sense, the expectations about how things could be. And then we didn't turn out the way that she wanted us to be. So she may have gone through many, many deaths. But really the best way, in any case, to honor our parents, to honor our mother, is to live with kindness, with others. That's the best way to honor our parents. And even in the case where they may want us to do certain things, they may want us to do other things. We can't ever do things perfectly according to their wishes, but the best way is to use our life in ways which benefit others. So some years ago on the radio, Sunday night radio in Australia, there's a program called The Spirit of Things, in which this woman who hosts that radio show is interviewing young Indian students, mainly students in Australia, not just students, but mainly students, young people, and their relationship to their parents. And one of the young guys that asked her, I realized as she gave the answer, was talking about it, and I thought, different view to him, but still holding some of that point of view. And that was that he said that I would always do what my parents want me to do because they've given me everything. And because they've given me everything, then I will always do what they want me to do. I thought to myself, well, that's not me. I'm not going to go down that pathway. And never forget the kindness of my parents and always do whatever I can possibly do to repay them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you do everything to satisfy their wishes, because even if you do that, if if you follow that pathway of doing everything they want you to, in the end, you may discover that you haven't made them happy anyway. That didn't work to make them happy because their happiness depended far more on their own state of being than it depended on what you did. And in the meantime, you've not used the opportunities our life offers us. And so many other people have been involved in providing us with this life, and other beings in past lives who help us create virtue in the past life, to create the actions of generosity and morality, for instance, that gave us this human life now. So we also owe it to them. We also owe it to so many people. We also owe it to our teachers to use the life in the best possible way, and that is, with good heart, repaying the kindness of others, living our life according to the Dharma. So this is first, thing I was thinking of in relation to our approach in our mind. Our approach is very much influences outcomes in our life. The second one was to do with the first teaching of the Buddha. The first teaching of the Buddha, of course, was the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. And within that first teaching was the first truth, and that is the truth of suffering. And so often in the worldly sense, when people hear of Buddhism or they mention something of Buddhism, precisely because of that, the truth of suffering, people conclude that Buddhism is very negative. Or is very bleak, like that. But in fact, that teaching is really like a treasure if we really understand the meaning behind it, and also a source of protection to our souls for suffering, and a source of sanity for our society, if in general people adopted this understanding. And it's more important than ever to have this kind of understanding about the reality that life brings problems. So it's not the case necessarily that Lama Zopa, when he teach Introduction to Buddhism courses, he teach 3 weeks on suffering. It might be the case like that, first 3 weeks and 4 weeks on suffering. It wasn't because he was a sadist, but he was trying to point out some significant thing. And I remember years later him saying to me, when I was teaching Introduction to Buddhism courses, him saying, there's not much point you teaching these courses if you don't teach on suffering. I'm bringing that up because there was a reluctance, understandably, the teacher, understandably, some reluctance on emphasizing suffering because people don't want to hear about it. But in understanding, it is extremely helpful because, for example, the atheist philosopher Alain de Botton, in his book Religion for Atheists, and Alain de Botton is the type of atheist who isn't the kind of guy like Richard Dawkins, who is very hostile towards religion and talks about the God delusion, and you must have an inferior level of intelligence if you believe in God, that kind of thing. Although in Buddhism we don't believe in God, but still, we still respect those who do believe in God. But in his book, Religion for Atheists, and he makes the point that although, we as atheists don't believe in God, we don't see ourselves as religious, it'd be extremely unwise for us to reject out of hand the wisdom that's existing within religion. There's a lot of wisdom within religion, and we have a responsibility to look into that and try to absorb it, into our lives in a positive way. And so one of the points he makes there is that one of the problems in the West today is not to do with pessimism, but it's got to do with optimism. And optimism, particularly in relation to science, technology, economics. Could be the next president of the United States and Australia, the next prime minister, who just got a new prime minister on Saturday night. So people maybe got optimism in relation to the next prime minister, the next girlfriend, the next boyfriend, whatever. Yeah. From the optimism in relation to this. So, of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you'd have to say, you couldn't say he's not an optimistic kind of person. He's a very optimistic person. But I think it's optimism based on what we would say in Buddhism as a more sober-minded appraisal of such things as science, technology, economics, next president, next girlfriend, next boyfriend. So he says that problem in the West because there's an optimism in relation to this. And he goes on to say that for the religious person, they are more pessimistic. He says the word pessimistic, I think sober-minded, more sober-minded in relation to these things. And therefore, as a result of that, they don't, have these experiences of a risal of, hope, unrealistic hope and expectation, and then the catastrophic fall down like this of disappointment that occurs as a result of this unrealistic expectation. He says, Alain Tibetan says, and I don't know if it's really true, but it might be worthwhile thinking about. He said, show me an angry person, and I'll say, I'll show you an optimist. I don't know if that's really true, but I can see where he's getting, what he's getting at. So, the idea that if you're religious, certainly if you have Buddhist understanding, you have a far more sober-minded attitude in relation to those things. You have the level of stability. And then when the disappointment occurs, you're able to deal with it, because you don't hold out too much expectation in relation to these things. Then also, in the book, the Book of Joy, there's discussion there, again, about this idea of that, what was it? Yeah, anyway, but the discussion, I forgot what I was going to say with that, but the discussion also about this idea, from the Book of Joy, there was discussion there about this. There's been thought, particularly in America, how it is that many cases of depression, I'm not saying they're all cases of depression, but many cases of depression arise on the idea, the understanding that life should be fair. And amongst the psychologists that have discussed this, they say the irrational view that life should be fair. Irrational, perhaps, I'm not too sure. Perhaps it's irrational because they're saying, because we can see in the world today, as it has always been the case, very often life isn't fair. Is it fair that we see, children born into places of violence, into poverty, innocent people suffering, innocent people suffering, as we see in Ukraine, everywhere like this. Very often, life is not fair. And even if we say, if you understood karma, you'd see it is fair. But the question is karma really fair? I don't know. I don't think it necessarily is fair, but it is in Buddhist understanding. This is the reality of how things are. So discussion is the depression. A lot of depression arises within people who have a tendency to hold the view that life should be fair. And having worked as a psychiatric nurse, and particularly in private psychiatric hospitals, where there is a lot of depression, and private places where at least in Australia, they come in as voluntary patients, they've come in voluntarily. Very often when you talk to them, the depression, there is a sense of how things should have been a particular way. They're very idealistic about how things should be. They can't accept that life is very often unfair, just like this. So as a result of that, that holding that view very strongly, that life should be fair, and holding that view, then when the misfortune occurs, there's a tendency to get angry because life hasn't turned out the way that I wanted it to turn out. But then if you've got that type of personality that becomes angry, you understand at the same time it's socially unacceptable to keep walking around and expressing this rage. So there's a tendency to withdraw, to become more self-obsessed like this, and then to descend into depression like this. All of it which arose to a large degree on that mistaken understanding, the irrational view, as they say, that life should be fair. So 2,500 years ago, the Buddha was teaching an antidote to this very problem. First off, he taught that life, that suffering comes with life, the sickness, aging, death, birth. Then there's not getting what you want. Then there's being separated from the things that you have, and then confronted with the things you don't like. And then, of course, there's the cycle of rebirth due to the power of karma and affliction. Like this, life brings problems. So that teaching 2,500 years ago was like an antidote that was presented by the world, by the Buddha 2,500 years ago, just as relevant today to problems in the world today, as an antidote to the state of mind of depression. Not saying all depression, because you could say it seems as though certain depressions come from chemicals in the brain. But there's a lot of depression that comes from this attitude that life should be fair. And so this gives protection. But it's not only that. If you open up more in your life to the reality of suffering, that life brings problems, how many people would have been protected if they'd opened up to that, would have been protected from becoming a drug addict? How many people end up being drug addicts because they can't deal with life's problems? They can't accept that life brings suffering. And they do everything they can to chase it away. But Buddhism is saying, facing it front on, life brings problems. And if you do this, if you face the problems, then you can work with them and transform them into something positive. They become opportunities. So this understanding of truth of suffering protects us from so many experiences of disappointment and anger, depression, despair, self-pity, so on. Merely from opening up to the idea that life brings problems. So I don't know how many cases of people's rage, people manifesting at this incredible levels of rage, in which they go out, particularly they go out and do the killings in the schools and so on. If those people, how many of those people there are people who have been brought up with an idea that life should have been a particular way and it hasn't turned out this way, and they harbor resentment, and they even go for the school itself, blame the school for it, because of an inability to be able to accept the fact that life brings problems. So this is an important thing. It's almost like people don't want to hear that one, truth of suffering, but taught straight off for a start, like first off, because opening up to this is a way of alleviating your own pain and suffering, becoming, in a sense, your own therapist by understanding this. So the analogy is often given that the experience of the suffering, like arrows that are fired at us, and as a response of that experience of those arrows, we get upset, and it may be because of unskillful reaction or response to the suffering. We fire another lot of arrows at ourselves. So Buddhist approach is to acknowledge that life brings problems, that the arrows have been fired and we don't have control over these ones. But what we can do is stop the second lot of arrows being fired by us, by our unskillful reactions, our unskillful levels of disappointment and so on, and then turn the first lot of arrows into acupuncture needles for healing. So that first teaching, the truth of suffering, becomes like a remedy. That which looked like poison becomes like medicine. Like to say that ordinary birds that eat poisonous plants, they die. But peacocks, if they eat poisonous plants, they transform into beautiful feathers. So the opportunity is there. Each situation, each difficulty that arises in life becomes the opportunity for us to flourish, to become a better person. And the great lamas in Tibetan Buddhism, the great practitioners, the real practitioners of the Dharma, when they talk about their experiences of losing their country and the pain that they went through a lot of pain, the loss, but then also being refugees in India and suffering. Many died. When they've come out and they continue to teach, you find they start to talk, they're not obsessed about their own suffering. More often than not, they talk about how that experience of the loss and pain became, in a sense, something beneficial. It allowed them the opportunity to really be able to practice Dharma, to understand through that experience, and through that experience and using the method of the Dharma, the medicine of the Dharma, to transform that poison into medicine, or like transforming base metals into gold through the Dharma, through a changed perspective. So the opportunity remains also for us. Whatever misfortune occurs in the life is an opportunity for us to become better people. And I think probably looking at people here in this class, none of us, would have not had some experience, I'm sure, of how it is when misfortune arises, that it can be the opportunity for something positive to really happen in the life, to transform it into something beneficial. And that beneficial thing usually relates somehow that we can use that experience to be of benefit to others, to help others. So it wasn't such a bad thing after all. And life-saving thing, really, to acknowledge that life brings problems. So third thing I was going to discuss was my own personal experience in relation to my dear dad and how over a period of time, through the benefit of the Dharma, I changed my attitude totally towards him and very much appreciate the value of the Dharma in doing that. So even if it was only that brought, the Dharma only did that in my life, brought about that, it was extremely beneficial. So with my father, often is the case, sons and their father don't necessarily get on so well. My father, as we were growing up, used to drink 12 bottles of beer every weekend. We're not talking small bottles of beer, we're talking big ones like this. Big bottles of beer. Start on Friday night, all through Saturday, right through Saturday, starting from 10 o'clock in the morning, I think, Saturday morning, Sunday, and then finish on Monday, like that, dozen bottles of beer, and then he wouldn't drink through the rest of the week. And when he drank, he'd be the same sorts of things he'd be saying over and over again for years. You know, he was involved in the Second World War in the military, and he used to say his thing is the only good Jap is a dead Jap, you know, Japanese. Only good Jap is a dead Japanese. And many racist remarks. Then also he would say they should drop a bomb on Canberra. Canberra is the capital of Australia, right? Kill all the pollies, the politicians, because they're taking these taxes like this. There'd be these same sorts of themes going on and on like this. And it was like sort of like a form of torture, hearing the same things over and over again, just repeating over and over again. And if you know people who've got a drinking problem, this is nothing unusual. This sort of thing occurs. And it culminated into a point where there was a big flash and I didn't talk to my father for several years like this. But then when I met Dharma, met Copan, went to Copan, did the Copan course and Copan retreat, and then Lama Yeshe gave the Vajrasattva initiation, and I did the group Vajrasattva retreat. By this time already, the influence of Dharma was there and starting to affect my mind and starting to see my father a bit differently. But then during the Vajrasattva, purification retreat of Vajrasattva, Vajrasattva seems to work in different ways, but one way it worked, I saw, was like how you look into a house. You look through a house through one window, and that's what I was doing. But Vajrasattva tends to get you to look at that through the house, through all the other windows, and also from an aerial point of view. So you start to look on that situation. And I looked on the situation of my father and my father's conduct and my father's personality and all the rest, from starting to see from different points of view, not just my point of view. That what I was seeing previously is true. It's not, it may be very true, but it's only a partial picture of what's in that house. It's not the total picture at all. And so the more that the retreat started to look at his situation and how he raised 5 sons and how none of us ever expressed words of appreciation for what he did. And although he might have drank a lot of beer and it may have driven us crazy, he was never, to us, he was never violent, he was never obnoxious. He was a happy drunk like this. And I started to see, actually, this is quite unusual. I knew how drinking can affect people and make many people violent. And there's certainly grounds for my father to be violent, I guess, by his difficult situation, lack of appreciation, so on. But he never became like that. Also, he worked as a real estate agent. Previously, I looked at real estate agents as people who rip other people off. But I started to see, no, real estate agents, they don't get paid a wage. You know, they've got to sell houses. He's got to pay for our education, our schooling, our food, everything. And it's dependent on him being able to sell houses. And he went to work every day. He never took any days off work for sickness, only his holidays. In all the years I knew, never one sick day off. Even if he had a headache, even if he had a hangover, he'd still go to work like this. Me, I'd use any opportunity to not go to work like that. So I started to see him completely differently, seeing things from different points of view. And then as well, Vajrasattva gets you to look at the person more of a total whole, not just how you see them, but to see them when they're a child, first day at school, and a frightened little boy at school, just a little boy, and then see them in their old age when they're vulnerable. And would it be appropriate for me to be having hostile attitudes towards this little boy or this vulnerable old man? Not appropriate. And then starting to see also further bigger picture of my father, how he was brought up during the time of the Depression and then went through the Second World War, and those influences which I had no understanding about. It wasn't my experience. And then he was raised by his grandmother, and I could see, yeah, well, that would be a difficult one to have a mother like that. So the more that I saw this, the more that my attitude started to change. And Vajrasattva kept working and working on me like this. And I was trying to resist it. But in the end, it's like, you've got no other choice but to, at the end of the Vajrasattva retreat, to write a letter of apology to him. I think 6 pages of apology and expressing my words of appreciation for all the positive things, I listed many positive things he'd done like this. So this was, I sent the letter off really quickly. This is before, emails. This is when you use the post-return. You send the letter off like that after the Vajrasattva retreat. And sent the letter off quickly before I changed my mind. I thought I might change my mind. And this had a very healing effect, not just for me, I think my father, and the relationship with the rest of the family, my younger brothers as well, improved the relationship he had with them, because I had changed in his mind. And so now I became more like his friend. And also in the following period of time I knew him, he changed as well as a result of that. But one of the things, though, so that really was very helpful. And I'm so appreciative of how it could have been that I could have lived with it. And you hear of people who hold this resentment against their mother or father. I'm so pleased that that didn't happen. And also the sense of experiencing the humility of writing to admit that you're wrong like that after you've done such destructive actions. It was also very good for me. But for one of the things, though, that did remain a problem for me for a long time was that those comments, like the racist comments that he made, and also the drinking and the problems that it created for others, someone who's drunk and you've got to listen to them, it's like torment for other people. And so it sort of was a problem in my mind. But then one time I was in retreat and I was thinking about it. And I realized actually that by the time I'd left primary school, I made this very clear decision that whatever happened in my life, I wasn't going to be a racist, because he was completely mistaken. I could see that, in that Japanese may have done terrible things, but the idea that the only good Jap is a dead Jap is totally mistaken. And because he'd said that so strongly, it made me think about it. And in the end, by the time I was in primary school, it was very clear in my mind, this is not the way to go, to be racist. No matter what happens in my life, I'm not going to be holding these kinds of prejudices against others. And the other thing was the drinking, that I made this sort of commitment that even if I got into drinking, I would not impose myself on others. I wouldn't do that. And so I don't know the kids at school, how other kids at school were, but I don't think there were any there that would have at that point, primary school would have made these decisions. I'm not very clear, very strongly. I'm not going to be racist, and also I'm going to be watching, even if I get into drinking, that I don't cause this suffering for others. So it made me think, when I saw all my father's good qualities from before, and I was amazed how it could be that he could be such sort of like a joyful drunk and never vindictive or resentment towards us. Right? I thought him was quite a remarkable character. But then on top of that, I started to think maybe he's a bodhisattva. My father was a bodhisattva. And he took birth as a bodhisattva. And he deliberately acted in that way to show me that that is not the path to follow. So in the end, I came to the conclusion, I think the most logical explanation is that my father was actually a bodhisattva. So I was very pleased. Someone think I'm crazy, you're fooling yourself. Oh, so I don't care if I'm fooling myself. I think it's a pretty good outcome to think that way. So it's given me the sense that it's possible. It really is possible how we can change our view about other people. The potential is always there. And the end result, if we do it, is it's so liberating for us. It's so liberating. And I don't know, joy giving. You're still able to discern, yeah, I'm not going to drink like that. I'm not going to be racist, but I'm not going to necessarily condemn wholeheartedly or completely other people, because you don't know what's going on behind, what the motivation might be. Right? There's always a possibility. So, we have a wonderful opportunity with our human life, and through the blessings of the Buddha, to potentially change any situation we're experiencing into something which is beneficial. Okay. All right, so anyone got questions?
Venerable Tony, I have a question. I struggle to understand karma, and I wonder, could you expand just a bit on what I think you said? Karma is not necessarily fair. What did you mean? I mean, could you just say a little bit more about that?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I was saying that particularly because I've noticed sometimes in Introduction to Buddhism course, when new people come, and some people won't accept karma because they don't see it as being fair, right? And if you think, for example, if you're born a cat, if someone's born a cat, right? It could be considered very unfair, because if you're a cat, you're a killing machine. What freedom does a cat have to not kill? It's got the whiskers to allow it to go through spaces it knows whether it can get through to get whoever it's chasing. It's so silent, so quiet, with how you just don't hear it. And then it's got claws and teeth, and it's very agile, so on. It's a real killing machine, right? So we could say it's the karma to be born a cat. So is that fair? The karma, whatever they've created, the cause has brought about this result to have the kind of body-mind combination and the instinct to kill. So to me, it doesn't seem fair, right? That's what I mean. But still, the Buddha, when he presented, he didn't invent karma, he just explained it. Just like Isaac Newton described gravity, he said this is how it exists by observations. He's existed that. And so someone might be sitting on the ground and throw a stone up in the air and just be saying, it's not fair, this stone keeps falling on my head. It's not fair, I keep throwing it up, why doesn't it keep going? But we sort of understand that just because the reality of gravity, if you throw a stone up, whether we like it or not, hits you on the head. Or like you might say, I'll put my head in this bucket of water and I should be okay. It's not fair though, I drown, If I jump over a cliff, it's not fair, I get killed. But the way that the physical nature of things is, this is how it is. And so it's a similar idea in karma, that the Buddha never explained it as being something fair. He didn't give an explanation for why karma exists. He just said, this is how it works. And why karma exists itself, as far as I know, hasn't been given, an explanation hasn't been given, but it's presented, this is how it is. And it's up to us to look to see if it's plausible that even though it manifests in this form, which you could interpret as not fair, it's still plausible that it exists. So is that what you meant along those lines?
Yes, that answers it. That makes it much more clear to me. It really does. Yeah.
So what do you think? So what do you think of? Do you think of karma? Do you think about it being fair, not fair, or is it in a sense not relevant?
No, I think of it being not fair. Like
not fair.
Children or anybody born in a war zone, suddenly they're in a situation where their lives are in grave danger, men, women, and children. And it seems like it's a collective karma that's forced. That's just where they landed, in it's a collective karma. I don't know the difference between individual and collective karma. I don't know where is the line drawn. You know, I mean, are they suffering because of their personal karma in a past life, or because of the karma of the generals who waged the war? Let's say Vladimir Putin and the generals. So, you know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me sometimes. But that helps your explanation.
How's your feeling in general? Does it does karma, you know, as an explanation, does it resonate with you as a possibility? I'm not saying necessarily you accept it completely, but
no, it resonates as a possibility, but just not in the very cut and dried way in which I sometimes hear it explained. Well, if you're suffering so much in this life, it's because of what you did in past lives or past life. And I always wonder, how do you know exactly with such certainty? You know, I sometimes wonder how, like you said, the Dalai Lama never explain how it works, just that it exists. So sometimes people come across explaining how it works. It's if you suffer serious harm in this life, it's because of your own shortcoming in a previous life. You know, it's just so cut and dried, it doesn't make sense to me sometimes. Like Hiroshima, all those people who died in Hiroshima, are we really supposed to believe it's because they all were gathered together in that place and they all had done some horrendous things in past lives? It's illogical to me. I mean, it's hard to believe from that perspective. And I tend to think of it more as collective karma. Maybe you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, for whatever the reason for that, which I can't explain either.
Well, that's right. I think your last part makes sense also. It's like it's a case of, you know, what is, for some people, it resonates with them. It's the will of God, for instance. For other people, it can be it's random or whatever. It's just how things are. And other people hold karma. I guess it's up to individuals to reflect on it and see what makes sense as best as possible. You know, as I said, it's only the Buddha who knows all the aspects of karma. And I guess I've come to the conclusion, to some extent, it makes sense. And then also on top of that, a lot has to do with listening to who's advising on it, not just the Buddha, but also those beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe, who are intelligent beings and people with compassion. And there's a certain consistency in what they say in relation to karma. So I guess I'm most inclined then to come to the conclusion, you know, that these events are a result of karma and also can be, you know, collective as a result of group karma.
Yeah, I sort of feel like what somebody said once in a group, regardless of whether we totally understand how it exists, it's a very good path to be on, the noble path. You know, the Dharma is a very, very good way out of suffering. That's how I see it, even though I can't fully explain karma. Anyway, thank you for that explanation.
Okay, Suzanne. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Monterey, California.
California. Okay.
Yeah, Monterey, right on the ocean.
So you married to a Japanese?
I was, yes, I was.
So where the Fuji comes from?
Well, Fujimoto is the full name, yeah.
Oh, okay. I wonder what my father would have said.
I wondered about that too.
Even my father moderated towards the end of his life, you know. You know what he said? When I went to buy my first motor car, he said, if it's Japanese or German, it can't go in the garage. And I said, why? Because it's got blood on it, right? But then a few years later, when my mother got her first car, it was a Japanese car, he was driving it into the garage. And I was just so tempted to say to him, it can't go in the garage because it's got blood on it. But by that time I said, no, we've got to keep this relationship going. Well, don't remind him, just leave it.
Yeah, good point.
All right, so we can conclude now. And so,
excuse me, Venerable, can Aiton
yes.
get a question in, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Paula. I don't want to make us too late or anything, but what came to my mind as you were speaking about, your dad, but more generally about when you come into contact with bias and prejudice or hate in others. What would you say is it the best way for me to moderate into that or intervene into that, or leave it alone and just worry about my own prejudices and my own biases, try and persuade other people or show other people their hate? I'm a therapist, so I just see it all the time, and I don't know my compassionate response to, someone who's just really being racist in front of me. Do I rather take care of my own problems in that way, or how would you intervene in someone else's bias, prejudice?
Well, I guess if you're a therapist anyway, and you're a Buddhist, you've been reflecting on it anyway. But because the part of it, when you were mentioning it, you were partially answering it anyway by talking about your own prejudices and biases. So that's part of the thing, isn't it? Really, is to acknowledge. But that's part of it, isn't it? Because otherwise, that prejudices often come precisely, well, I'm right and they're wrong, right? And and there's no space in between. But obviously, you've explored that, and you know that you live with these things anyway. And that means then when the other person's doing things, they are also to some degree a reflection of your own mind, or we have our own biases as well. Certainly, obviously, some people are far more intolerant than others, it's very clear. But the working point to acknowledge what you're saying there is, I'm sure, is for your own, it allows you to maintain a reasonably sane state of mind, that you hold that you are also not perfect because you have these tendencies. And for some people, you just realize that the type of personality that they have anyway, it can be almost like sowing seeds onto stony ground. The way that their mind is, that it's not going to open. And the only way it may open is if you do develop the sort of skill that isn't antagonistic towards them, because most likely those type of people have experienced others all the time who are antagonistic towards them, and they just get more and more strong in their view. So that it's a matter of being skillful, but being skillful in such a way that you don't usually, otherwise you don't want to go down that path where you agree with everything they say. But you would know as a therapist, as a psychiatric nurse, as they say, is that what you don't do, you never argue against the person's delusion. And of course, in these fanatical cases, it's almost delusional. You don't argue against them, because then they will get stronger in their point of view. But of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that therefore you go along with everything that they say. I guess humor has a lot to do with it, helpful with it. Some friend of mine who was I was kind of a bit delusional. She told me that someone who got hold of her passport, right, and then changed, she was born in one of the republics of Yugoslavia, the ex-Yugoslavia, I think. She was from Croatia, I think. And it changed the birth where she was born, right? I come along, taken the passport out of a room and changed and put this other thing. Someone had done this. So she held that view. And she told one guy this. And this guy was a psychiatric nurse, and I thought he must have picked up some wisdom in the job. And his answer to her was, don't fucking worry about it. So I thought that was the best way. But he's not arguing against it. Doesn't say, oh, it's not possible because it didn't. How could someone come into your room, right? Doesn't bother with that. But nor does he go along with it. He just, well, right? So I don't know, to some degree, this could be helpful because these people blow up these things, really huge, big deal, don't they? And create problems for themselves and for others. So I don't know, tonight probably aren't helping you, but I'm sure you've thought about it a bit anyway.
I appreciate you saying what you did. I generally don't mess with it too much, but then there's an inner voice which reacts to it. But I think I picked up what you said a little while ago, that we'll look at all what they must have gone through in their lives to arrive at that state of mind and state of perception, and they're continuing suffering probably because of it. So I guess I'm advocating don't get more involved.
Yeah. But of course, then there's the issue, of course, when it gets to the point of there's a moral issue, isn't there? When there's a group movement and so on, and particular ways of thinking, where, if you don't say something, but that's probably another situation.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I don't think I've been confronted with that kind of thing yet. It's a difficult one. It's just a very hard one. The best thing I can do in my life right now is just don't say anything. From what I've gone through so far in my life, but sometimes I wonder. It's a shady area, and maybe just take care of my own karma better than try and take care of someone else's.
Yeah, well, maintaining a good frame of mind and so on is best thing to be able to help the person. And if you don't react to the things that they've said, they may also be trying to provoke an answer, a sort of response from you. But then that can also be helpful for the next interaction anyway, because you haven't, in a sense, burnt your bridges.
That's right.
In that relationship with the person.
Yes. True.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Venerable, I don't want to keep you longer than necessary, but may I say to everybody, you were singing the praises of the Vajrasattva retreat. And what I'd just like to say, I think everybody knows, but some may not, every evening, our evening express meditation, 30 minutes, is a Vajrasattva purification. And it's with the incredibly wonderful product of Australia, like yourself, Venerable Katie Cole.
Oh, Katie. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Monday to Friday, you can do that at 9 p.m. MDT. That's it.
So, Kaola, where are you? You're from the UK originally. You in the US? You live in the US? But you're from the UK.
I'm in Japan.
Oh, Japan. Oh, gosh. Okay. There's a strong Japanese connection, isn't there?
I didn't marry any of them, though. We're good.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we conclude now. We dedicate. So then whatever positive results have been from us reflecting on this subject today, it may be the case that it does influence our heart and mind in a positive way, so that we can be a positive influence in the world. So thank you. Bye. Maybe see you next week.